Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Pettin In The Park, released in 1934. It's the 72nd in the series and it's directed by Bernard Brown. You can find this HD restoration on the Gold Diggers of 1933 Blu-ray set, which is appropriate given that the main song comes from that particular film. Now, I can't show you the full cartoon here due to copyright on YouTube, but, well, we got two very different ideas in this short. It's a bit of a mess, and I will go through it later on, but we start off with a promotion for Pettin In The Park, where it's all set in the park. You got these birds and this police officer and a maid, pitch and woo, as they say. And then that whole idea just dropped, and we then see a bird race. Because, yeah, that's completely related to each other, right? But anyway, so first you're going to see a re-edit of the original audio commentary I did before I had to take that down. Then you'll hear some new thoughts from me, and then you'll hear from my good friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor. He's going to go through the music and some history on the credited director here, Bernard Brown. And then you'll, hear a conclusion. So, without further ado, let's get into it. You'll notice that it says it's directed by Bernard Brown, who was the musical director on the Bosco and Buddies, and he would actually do some more musical directing for a little while before leaving. But and also, if you had a look at the animators on there, you see Bob Clampett, who would of course become a major Looney Tunes director and certainly one of my favorites. This cartoon is just a very, very strange cartoon. It starts off doing one type of story and then completely forgets it and does something completely different. In fact, it becomes kind of like an early Bob Clampett cartoon. Yeah, I like this gag here with it's a little bit cheeky. You got a lot of the usual time-wasting gags, and then the cops, of course, not happy with someone else trying to pet the maid he was trying to pet, if you get my meaning. Knocks him out, they drive off. No baby. Where's the baby? it's just gone. And then that's it. All done. Now we're up to, I guess, the real cartoons. Yeah, this really does feel more like a later Looney Tunes cartoon. That's pretty much it. They just do all these crazy gags. Athlete's foot, of course. Yeah, just get a bathtub that someone randomly abandoned at this park. I've heard of leaving rubbish, but a bathtub, that's not exactly something you'd normally think would be left at the park, but anyway. This is probably one of the first times since doing the commentaries where it feels more like a later proper Looney Tunes cartoon. There were some in the past that actually had some hints here and there, but this one, once it actually starts with this whole new direction, once the cop gets knocked out, this is the sort of thing that we're used to. So those are my original thoughts in the audio commentary, and I do stand by what I said before, that this is one of those first few shorts that feels like a Looney Tunes short that we all know and love today, and with the previous one being, sitting on a backyard fence was another one. So where it felt more loony as opposed to being, say a Disney imitation or that sort of thing. But yeah, we have two different ideas here. I mean, you've got your starting point, and okay, they're promoting the song, which that's what the Merry Melodies were. They were promoting a song in the Warner's catalog. But then it just abruptly changes to this bird race, and it's just weird. So some have theorized that Frank Tashlin, who had actually worked at the studio around this time very briefly before he was fired by Schlesinger because of his whole Tish Tash comic thing, and I can kind of see it. If you look in the beginning with the way the characters are animated, it seems to be in the Tashlin type style, and it's his kind of humor as well. If you watch a lot of his shorts and then of course his later features, this is the sort of thing he would do, and it's pretty funny, it really is. But then the later half seems to be a lot more like a Bob Clampett short, it's wild, wacky, and at this point, I mean, the guy hasn't had any directing experience, so of course, can't expect too much from him at this stage, but you can see things are a little bit more wild and wacky and in the vein of his sort of comedy. But then, to throw another spanner in the works here, it was Jack King, like he was the head animator at the time, and according to Michael Barrier, so who really did what? I don't know. But the way it looks like to me, and this is just a theory, okay? I think Tashlin started the idea off, he started the short, he was then let go, or he left, or whatever happened, and there was a scramble to finish it, and it was just left up to the animators to do whatever, and Bernard Brown would just came in and just put the finishing touches, and he was given credit as director. That's what I think. But I think it's just one of those things that's lost to time unless we find some sort of mysterious paperwork just lying around or something that wasn't destroyed or, wasn't, it hasn't disappeared, as paper does, of course. But anyway, that's just my theory. But I definitely want to hear from you guys as to what you think might have been the reason for Bernard Brown being the director, even though, the whole short being so disjointed. But there's a lot to like about this short, despite the disjointed nature of it. I mean, I like the cheekiness of the beginning, with the low voice in the kid when he's singing. I don't know why that's the case, but I thought it was pretty funny. And we get a pre-Hays Code type joke where we get the penguin biting the girl on the bottom. That will certainly be a no-no later on. I mean, yeah, there'd be butt jokes later on, but you wouldn't actually show it happening, unlike here. And what's really pushing things in this short, and this would have been a real no-no once the Hays Code came in, is when the maid hooks up with this random guy just out of the blue. He's just there, just, I don't know, he just looks at her, she looks at him, and then you just see their silhouettes, you see, and with the silhouettes, they looks kind of on the raunchier side. It's leaning towards there. They were really, really pushing it there. And weirdly enough, what happened to the baby? She's clearly taking the baby for the walk, maybe she's working for a rich couple or whatever, and then of course she just sees this guy and just leaves the baby behind, and that's pretty much it. So again, if it is true that Tashlin started this, maybe there might have been something more to it. Who knows? Maybe the cop would have found the baby and then something would have happened. I don't know. I'm not going to overthink it like I clearly am right now. And then we got some wonderful Clampett-esque type jokes, and the reason I say Clampett as well is because he is credited as an animator on this short. At the time, the animator credits were sort of just rotated around, but I wonder if he was actually credited more because maybe he did a lot more on this one. I don't know. But, some of the gags work, some of it doesn't. But then again, if Clampett did do some of this, you can't expect too much at this point. And the guy was also in his early 20s too, but at this point in time, we got some really weird gags, like how there's a rubbish bin just randomly there after they're doing the dive, and the rooster making the chickens row with their arms, and the whole pelican gag where the fishes all come in, then it swallows a alarm clock. So it's kind of like Tex Avery before Tex Avery. It was basically, it looks like the animators were just let off the leash and just like, you know what, we got to get this thing out, we've got a half-completed cartoon here, just do something. And if you look in the background, it doesn't even look like it takes place in the same thing as the beginning of the short. It's clearly a park in the beginning, but then once we see this race, it looks like it's just some lake in the middle of nowhere. But anyway, what do I know? And, towards the end of it, we then see how the swans are really pissed off at this penguin. And, we got this wonderful 3D effect in the background. And weirdly enough, it just ends as well. So just to recap this whole short, and it's bonkers when you try and describe it, point by point. So we see the birds pitching woo. We see the officer trying to chat up the maid. The maid thinks the police officer has pinched her bottom. She walks away. She sees a random guy, decides to completely fall for him. She forgets the baby. The police officer gets knocked out. We then see that there's going to be a race. There's like random diving events. Then there's a race. Then the two characters that announce the race, the parrot and the penguin, they decide to enter the race themselves by getting this abandoned bathtub that just happens to be there. They try and cheat the whole race. Then there's no ending of the race, and the penguin goes up against three swans. I mean, have I got that right? Wow. Anyway, that's why they needed a story person to fix that up. The reason for this short is the promotion of the music, and so my good friend Manny Cruz is going to now go through the musical part of this short. So take it away, Manny.
Hi, everyone. This is Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor, coming at you with another edition of It's Time for Manny's Music Time, with music trivia for you today. Bum. Welcome back, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1934 merry melody, Pettin In The Park, directed by Bernard Brown. An interesting choice of director, and I will be talking a little bit more about him in a little bit. So, let's talk about the cartoon itself. So, Pettin In The Park has several cues. One of them that was so minor that I guess it wasn't written down just cuz. But let's talk about the cues themselves. So, first off, in the opening titles, after you hear Merry Melody's theme, I Think You're Ducky, you hear a little bit of Spring Song or Frühlingslied by Felix Mendelssohn during the opening titles. Just a tiny little snip. It's like blink and you miss it kind of thing. But I did notice that in this rewatch. So the cartoon starts off when you see all the lovebirds getting, kissy and pitching woo and petting, which is another way of saying, kissing and necking your honey bun or whatever, but just another way of, flirting or kissing and all that. And during that scene with the lovebirds, literally, and then you see a little glimpse of the cop trying to pitch woo to the lady, you hear the song You. That's literally the song. You. Y-O-U. You. Not me. You. I was having trouble trying to find the name of the composer of this one, because according to the cue sheet, it says Meyer, and I tried looking up the BMI database for song cues that are used in music, as well as for looking up copyright information. And I found two songs. One of them was by Joseph Meyer and Johnny Mercer, and the other one was by Charles Meyer, but I couldn't find a recording to verify it, so I'm just going with what I hear in the cartoon. So You by a person named Meyer. And then we get to the title track, Pettin In The Park. We hear a lot of it throughout the cartoon. It was written by Harry Warren and Al Dubin. Again, you've heard those names plenty of times. That particular song was originally featured in the 1933 feature, Gold Diggers of 1933, and Dick Powell did a recording of it. And if I'm not mistaken, he does it in the film.
Pettin' in the park, bad boy. Pettin' in the dark, bad girl. First you walk a little, then talk a little, then steal a little kiss.
Come on, I've been waiting long. Why don't we get started?
Come on, maybe this is wrong, but gee, what of it? We just love it. Pettin' in the park.
Pettin' in the park, bad girl. Pettin' in the park, all right. But I'll see to it that they don't do it. I'll stop this petting right now. Hey!
Now, speaking of the film, a few weeks ago, they had a screening here. Well, a train ride away because I live in New Jersey. But they had a screening of Gold Diggers of 33 in New York City. But I unfortunately couldn't go that night, and I would have been bummed out because I would have been, geeking out like, oh my God, I hear all the songs I hear in Warner Brothers cartoons, blah, 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 so on and so forth. But maybe another time, or I'll just watch it, online or streaming, or just buy a Blu-ray of it from the Warner Archive. Little plug for them. They do great work. Later on in the cartoon, you hear a song called Ah, the Moon is Here by Sammy Fine. That particular song is from another 1933 feature, Footlight Parade. Now, Footlight Parade has been really popular in these past few cartoons because this song, Ah, the Moon is Here. Next cartoon that I'll be talking about down the road is Honeymoon Hotel, is also featured in Footlight Parade. One Step Ahead of My Shadow is from that film. By a Waterfall, that has been used a fair amount in Warner Brothers cartoons. That's also from this film. Sitting on a Backyard Fence, which I spoke about not that long ago. It's also from this film. So Footlight Parade is just a big deal, and I've spoken about it in other commentaries. In the film itself, there's a scene where various women are trying to audition with that specific song, The Moon Is Here. And you have James Cagney and Frank McHugh that are playing two of the main characters in the film. They're just like, nope, move on, next. And you hear women with different types of voices, some that are more appropriate for, you could say, more contemporary music, that time period. There's one singer that sounded like a ton of opera sopranos that I've heard in my life. And then eventually they find Ruby Keeler, who starts singing it along with Dick Powell. And Keeler and Powell are the two leads in the film. You do hear that song throughout the race near the end when the cartoon just jumps from having a bunch of couples kiss and the cop and the guy in his car and all that to the race with all the birds and animals. Also, that's featured in the scene during the race is the song Under the Lamp of Love, which is another composition by Sammy Fine. If you want to learn more about Sammy Fine, please listen to the commentary for One Step Ahead of My Shadow, which is another song that was in Footlight Parade, just like the title track of this cartoon. It's the circle of music, or just cues that Frank Marsalis and now Bernard Brown and Norman Spencer like to draw upon. And if you want to learn more about Harry Warren, please check out the commentary for a great big bunch of you. And speaking of Bernard Brown, I wanted to focus this particular commentary on Mr. Brown himself. No relation to Treg Brown, which we'll speak about in a bit. Who is Bernard Brown? So good old Bernard Brown. His real name is Bernard Bone Brown, so B-H-O-N. And he was born in Lafarge, Wisconsin, to Charles and Ida Brown on July 24th, 1898. And by the way, all this information, I'd like to say, comes from the wonderful blog done by Don Yaup. Tralf has one, so I want to thank him for this information. And I continue on and I quote, Bernard's father was a photographer. The family was in Los Angeles by 1910. The 1920 census lists Brown as being a musician in motion pictures, and by 1930, he was the head of a special effects department, presumably at Warner Brothers. Before making music and sound his career, he had a job as a bill clerk for a wholesale drug company. Bernard Brown died in Laguna Hills, California on February 20th, 1981. So Bernard Brown was a very interesting guy in sound editing history as well as music. So he was a musician, as I mentioned before. At the time when he went to Warner Brothers, he was a sound editor for the cartoons during the early Schlesinger studio days. And his regular work, as he would call it, was recording scores for the Warner Brothers features. So the information I'm about to give you comes from the wonderful book Hollywood Cartoons by Michael Barrier. Bernard Brown, according to Michael Barrier, and I quote, had the ability, useful everywhere, especially in Hollywood, to approach the big shots with just the right mixture of deference and ease, and they were comfortable turning to him for help beyond the scope of his nominal feature. Or, from the same chapter, as Bob Clampett would say, and I quote, Bernard would just ooze into any hole that needed filling. I laugh at the word ooze because I'm a huge Ninja Turtles fan, and I just saw the new film Mutant Mayhem twice. Ooze has a nice ring to it. Ooze, and Michelangelo does a weird hand sign. So anyway, I digress. So Bernard Brown was a bit of a jack of all trades, you could say, because he was doing the sound editing for the cartoons. He was also, you could say, a co-music director along with Norman Spencer. And by the way, Bernard Brown was responsible for getting Norman Spencer as well as Tom Palmer into the studio. They had a brief connection with Leon Schlesinger in 1932, and then 33 when Harmonizing Studios skipped town and Schlesinger was trying to find staff. He decided to hire Brown, Spencer, and Tom Palmer, and like I said, Bernard Brown brought Palmer and Spencer with him. Clampett was saying that he would ooze or help, so to speak. Bernard Brown even stepped up to the director's chair for this cartoon, and I remembering off the top of the head, I believe the other one was Those Wonderful Dames, or Those Beautiful Dames, something like that. Because there was a lot of turmoil at this time. So remember, Tom Palmer was supposed to be the head honcho director of the studio at this time. He directed Buddy's Day Out, which was a disaster that Fritz Freeling had to come and clean it up. And he also did I've Got to Sing a Torch Song, which, yeah. And he decided to move on or be fired. I don't remember the exact story. Again, I don't have it off the top of my head. And then you had Earl Duvall, who had 5 cartoons himself. I'll be talking about one of his cartoons, Honeymoon Hotel, soon. but he was fired. So Bernard Brown had to do the sound editing for the cartoons. He had to score some of the cartoons. And again, he traded with Norman Spencer when it came to music direction. In this particular cartoon, Pettin in the Park, Norman Spencer is doing the score, and Bernard Brown, who has no experience in animation, drawing, or whatever, but he stepped up for the director's chair anyway. So jack of all trades. However, Bernard Brown did have an extensive career after he left Warner Brothers. So in 1936, Bernard Brown did leave Leon Schlesinger Productions, and he decided to go to Universal Pictures, and he became the head of the sound department there. And he had a pretty successful career. He was nominated for the Academy Award for sound editing multiple times. He won an Academy Award eventually. And some other things that I want to bring up, and again, this is coming in from the blog from Don Yaup, again, from an article that came out that was written about Bernard Brown, but some other highlights that you could say of his career. Bernard Brown did the orchestration for the 1916 film by D.W. Griffin, Birth of a Nation, which is an extremely controversial film. However, it does hold a lot of significance, not only for filmmaking, but in particular for film music. I took a film music class in my graduate studies, and we were talking about the score for Birth of a Nation. And again, considering just the subject matter of the movie itself, it wasn't easy to navigate, but I actually did not know until doing the research for this that Bernard Brown actually did the orchestration for that particular movie. He also did some conducting and arranging for the first talkie, the jazz singer that came out from Warner Brothers in 1928. As you know, the film that had Al Jolson singing, and you ain't seen nothing yet, folks. He won 2 Academy Awards. He had 9 nominations, as I mentioned before. And he did pretty well for himself. You know, he was a violinist. He applied to the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He got in, and he got moved from the 6th violinist to the 1st violinist. So bravo. So he's just a really, really awesome musician. And that's what led him to be connected to assist the conductor, Carly Eleanor, who was asked to do the select music for the film for Birth of a Nation. And yeah, I was actually learning a bunch of more things about Bernard Brown that I knew a little bit about him prior to researching this cartoon, but he had a pretty successful career outside of Warner Brothers after he left to go to Universal and do sound editing. Like I said, he won Academy Awards. He was nominated. He did retire from the film industry in 1958. And as I mentioned, he died in 1981. But I mean, he was there during a very important and critical period of the studio's history, after the transition from harmonizing and Schlesinger's trying to set up his own studio. And Bernard Brown, from what I've read, was a well-liked guy, and he did his job well. He was scoring cartoons. He was recording them. He did some interesting choices for sound effects. His successor, Treg Brown, no relation, would come in. And speaking of sound effects for the Warner Brothers cartoons themselves, I mean, if Bernard Brown was on this level, and I'm using my hand like in front of me, just imagine just the heights and leaps that his successor and non-relative Treg Brown would make. In particular, Treg Brown being the guy who would hire Mel Blanc in 1936 to do the voices for the Warner Brothers cartoons, and the rest is history. So those are my thoughts, my research, and all that fun stuff for the 1934 cartoon Pettin in the Park. It's always nice to get a decent amount of information out of a cartoon that, to be honest, there's not really much to talk about of the cartoon itself. I mean, people in love, a random bird race, and still some very wonky animation from the early days of the Schlesinger studio. But, I felt it was a good time to talk about Bernard Brown and his contributions to the history of the Warner Brothers studio and the Warner Brothers cartoons. So I hope you all enjoy this commentary. Keep learning, keep having fun. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow me on social media, on Instagram, Threads. I'm going to say Twitter, but that's gone. X or whatever. Facebook at the Toony Tenor. TheToonyTenor for plenty of music and geek content. So thanks for listening. Have a blast with Anthony and whoever else he decides to put on this commentary. And most importantly, so long, folks. Oh, before I forget, Bernard Brown also did the voice or the sound effect of some of the birds in the cartoon. Whoopsie! Forgot that. Bye.
Come on, folks.
Thank you, Manny. So, yeah, this is a very disjointed cartoon, and it's in bits and pieces. They've got some funny gags. Some fall flat, some work, whatever. I found myself enjoying this short, but it's just, yeah, forgettable. And, it's a great song, by the way. It really is. But, I'm going to give this one a 6.5 out of 10, and maybe it's a little unfair because it was disjointed due to what was happening at the studio, but whatever. It is what it is. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.